All right, I'm here with my landlord Bruce from Walker Campus. He graduated Plymouth State in 2000 with a degree in history and geography, so he knows his stuff. Yep. So, Bruce, my first question is: do you think sexuality, things such as sexual orientation, sexual activity, sexual feelings, has changed in how it has been presented in movies from when you were a college student to today, or even if you've seen earlier movies in life?
So, I spent many years in high school. I worked at a video store, so I watched lots of movies in the mid-90s. Sexuality from at least from the early to mid-90s to today has changed significantly. Because in early mid-90s, you didn't talk about gay men, gay women, and if they did, it was this special, like, not a mainstream movie. Whereas today, it's not even, it's just there. Very inclusive in that aspect. Also, generally speaking, they didn't, in the mid to late 90s, there was a little more conversation about, sexuality, but generally it was the punchline. Whereas now they are legitimate characters within inside the movie, and there's no, they talk about someone that's gay in a movie, and it's fine.
It's all casual.
It's casual.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so-and-so's got a boyfriend, or so-and-so's got a girlfriend. Whereas in the 90s, they needed to lead up to that. Very specifically, they were the side character and they were the punchline of a joke, or they were used in a way to further the story, but not as, casually as it is now. So I would say that would change significantly. And then sexuality as a whole changed, especially in the early 90s, you had very sexually explicit, they were pushing the envelope of rated R films for nudity and sexual interactions. Basic Instinct, pretty much, still talked about today, was in the early 90s. And actually, was it in the early 90s? Maybe it was 91. I think Basic Instinct was 1991.
Look it up.
I'll look it up right now.
1992.
92. Damn. That was, then you had a flurry of films that kind of tried to model that, very highly sexualized content. Whereas today, there is some sexualized content, but when I was in school, when I was a college student, we had Wedding Crashers, or just after, there's a scene in Wedding Crashers which is pretty graphic. Whereas I don't see that as much in movies today.
All right, thank you. Going off that, kind of talking about how sexuality is a lot more open.
Yep.
Nowadays, do you think the youth have been negatively affected by portrayals of sexuality in film?
No.
No. Do you think it's something else that's kind of making kids?
Okay, Tipper Gore. That's pretty much her. In the 90s and in the actually late 80s, they had the whole concept of we can't do this because it impacts our youth. I don't believe that. The availability of internet is far outstrips anything that can be found with inside, cinema today. And the open dialogue from social media from today totally, outstrips the ability for cinema to be able to truly influence, our youth.
So it's not really breaking any barriers.
I don't think it's breaking any barriers, and that might just because I'm out of touch, but I don't believe that, because they're portraying any sort of sexualized content inside mainstream cinema, So
Yeah.
up to rated R, it certainly doesn't impact someone's, ways in which they do stuff.
Yeah.
There can be an argument that pornographic video and the availability of that on the internet certainly has shaped the ways in which people interact. That is a pretty reasonable study that's been out there. But I don't think in the case of what you're looking at from mainstream movie cinema, there's nothing that's drastically changed between the 80s and 90s and today.
Yeah, same like for health teachers, as we kind of see, it's more like it's not the information's out there. It's more like validity.
Yep.
And like what's really true, what's really not, like what's actually happens in real life versus like what's fantasized or what's fake or make believe.
Yeah. And
so
the fantasy,
and
the fantasy is the problem.
Yeah.
Is that X-rated films are fantasy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, all too often, that material does impact people because they think that that's the way it's supposed to be, and it's not.
Yeah.
But there's nothing inside a movie outside of the romantic fantasies of, that you're going to fall in love, and the typical Cinderella stories, which anybody that's been married realize. I mean, they're stories. They're the things that everybody sits back and say, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if someone sat outside my window, like and sang anything with a boombox, right? That would be sweet." And the reality is if you did that, someone would call the cops today, and you'd get arrested for stalking.
True. Yeah. So we talked about like TV ratings. So you mentioned we learned about the Hays Code in this class. Which do you know about it?
I believe I have a general.
It's like the predecessor for like the modern day like TV movie ratings. So it's like, oh, you can't have this or you can have so much, right? Do you have an opinion on why like cinema needed to be censored around like the 1930s or even like around that time frame, even if it was an accurate portrayal and depiction of life? Like there was movies that showed like women getting hit, rape culture, kind of women expressing like their sexuality, like kind of being sexual predators. Do you have an opinion on like why they thought they'd censor that, or do you have an idea? Or
everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do believe at some point it's a good guideline for folks to take a look at and determine at a glance what it might be. But in movies, for instance, you look at movies that were PG in the early 80s, so pre-PG-13, so late 70s, early 80s, PG was pretty intense, So then they went to PG-13. And PG-13 really allowed, even now, you can drop the F-bomb in a PG-13 movie. And the fantasy graphics for action sequence and the violence is so much higher than it was for an R-rated movie in the 1970s. For instance, Rambo, the first Rambo. What was the worst thing that was said? Nothing. There was some difficult content, but Rambo was rated R because he shot up a town and killed people. Not even extraordinarily graphically killed people in comparison to what you'd see now with like Saw or something else.
Yeah.
You watch First Blood, there's little to no, significant graphic deaths. Whereas now you watch stuff and, you look at American Assassin. They physically show the person removing fingernails. There's
gruesome stuff.
Gruesome.